the middle powers must act together, because if we're not at the table, we're on the menu.
Somewhere Europe has to grow out of the mindset that Europe's problems are the world's problems, but the world's problems are not Europe's problems.
चुन चुन करके हिसाब लेना ये मेरी फितरत है.
Why should it be a problem if I'm smart enough to have multiple options? You should be admiring me.
भारत झुकने वाला भी नहीं.
The rise of India will be determined by India. It will be determined by our strength, not by the mistakes of others.
The old order is not coming back. We shouldn't mourn it. Nostalgia is not a strategy.
Hey guys, welcome to my channel. If you enjoy deep analysis on global power shifts, trade, energy, and changing world order, make sure to like and subscribe. And without much ado, let's get started. Today's video is all about why India punches well below its weight class. See, 10 years ago, India's National Security Advisor, Mr. Ajit Doval, he described the country in a very direct way. He said, India has mentality to punch below its weight. We should not punch below our weight or above our weight, but improve our weight and punch proportionately. Those were his words, not mine. Okay. And this line actually captured a reality many strategists I would say, had quietly accepted. India is a massive country. It's a nuclear power, one of the largest militaries on the world. And if you look into global power index, it's the fourth strongest and fourth powerful military in the world. But historically, if you look into it, then it rarely projected power proportionate to its size. Like, for example, if you take 1971 war, India let go of 93,000 POWs of Pakistani army. They made 93,000 Pakistani soldiers surrendered in front of the Indian army. But after 3 years of feeding them for free, India fed them, kept them nicely, this and that. And India let them go. And Pakistan still did not let go 54 of India's soldiers. Then on 2015, Mr. Doval also added something even more revealing in that same speech, actually. He argued that power only matters if a nation is willing to use it, which I think is right. Otherwise, having power by refusing to apply it is like, having money but starving because you refuse to spend it. Or having a car and still walking hundreds of miles. So now fast forward, May 2025, Operation Sindoor. India fires missiles into Pakistan, deep into Pakistani territory. And Pakistan is a nuclear power, guys, okay? If you don't know, then I'm just letting you know. So what happened on May 2025 was a war between two nuclear powered countries, okay? That's not something that happened just like that. So India fires missiles deep into Pakistan. It was not some sort of retaliation for a ground incursion, okay? It was a very proportionate response. It wasn't some symbolic strike on an empty field like Pakistanis normally claim, okay? It was precision cross-border hits using India's supersonic cruise missiles. Multiple sites. Within 4 days, Pakistan surrendered. It was coordinated in air, missile, intelligence architecture, executing everything simultaneously. And this kind of operation, many NATO members train for in exercises. But they still cannot actually deliver that in real combat. The point I'm trying to make is that even NATO cannot deliver that kind of precision the way India did. India delivered it. Cold. Excuse me. Without asking for permission, without apologizing. What's interesting is that, in fact, President of the United States tried calling India, and India didn't even pick up the phone of the President of the United States. Operation was executed, message was sent, India moved on. They made a point that Operation Sindoor will continue. If you did something, we will strike you again, and this time we will end you. So, this whole thing, India moved on, right? But this raises a much bigger question. If India clearly has the capability to strike like this, why did India spend decades punching below its weight class in the first place? Because the answer is not about weakness, it's about how India's power was structured, constrained, and deployed inside the global system and its own political system. Okay, now let's talk about weight class, what I'm trying to get to. Okay, I want to establish something before we get into the reasons, because the argument only works if you accept the premise. And I don't have to push you to accept the premise. The whole world accepts the premise that India is already a great power. America knows it, America accepts it, Russians know it, Russia accepts it, China knows, China accepts it. And the whole world, European Union knows it, and European Union accepts it. So this episode is not about India's rise. All right, India has already risen. What we are examining here is the gap between the power India possesses and the power India actually exercises. The gap is the entire story. Okay, so let's establish the weight class first. Okay, let's talk about the weight class. Okay, India today looks like a geopolitical heavyweight. Not just looks like, India is a heavyweight. Okay, it influences lots and lots of countries, lots and lots of scenarios. Okay, just look at Israel-Iran war. Pretty much every country that's out there has said that only country that can actually stop this war is India at this point. Now look at the numbers. Let's look at the numbers. Numbers will tell you that population 1.43 billion people, out of which 320 million strong is the military age population, which is almost the size of United States of America, the entire population of the United States of America. Military spending is $100 billion annually, and nuclear power with full nuclear triad, with second strike capabilities, and that second strike capability is actually becoming stronger by the day. It has a strategic position in the Indian Ocean. India holds the leadership in IOR, Indian Ocean Region Club. Okay, and this Indian Ocean region, through which roughly 65% of the global oil shipments move. So by every objective measure, India is one of the most important geopolitical actors on the earth. It's not just today. In fact, historically, if you look at it, except for a brief period of 200-300 years, India was always a very important geopolitical heavyweight in the global scenarios. So the weight class is not ambiguous. The explanation is not capability. India has the capability, India has the resources. The explanation is structural, historical, and institutional. And for the first time in 75 years, those structures are beginning to change. So let's talk about it. Let's go through them and let's see what exactly is going on. First of all, as usual, I will share my screen. Okay. So why does a confirmed great power refuse to act like one? US imposes, China coerces, Russia disrupts, India requests, abstains, and hedges. So these are some of the reasons first of all, but let's go through the reason number one. Okay. Reason number one is that too much national energy is consumed domestically. What does that even mean? See, India is a huge country. India is not just some uh, huge country just by the land mass. Okay. India is a very huge country in terms of diversity as well. Okay. If you look at it, then India in itself is a continent. Okay. It is effectively a civilizational scale political system. Like I said earlier, 1.43 billion people, 28 states, 8 union territories, 22 official language, 450 spoken languages, and 250 dialects. And in fact, here's another important fact, that India has cities that are just simply the continuous living civilization on this planet. Those cities are the only continuous living civilizations that exist today since the dawn of time. Okay, dawn of humanity. So so it makes this whole thing, the whole administrative complexity, very enormous. That's what this whole thing, diversity, makes it very enormous. So every year, India basically absorbs roughly 10 to 12 million new workers entering the labor force. And that labor force is basically diverse. That is also diversified. That is also spread out all over the world. Urbanization is still only 36 to 37% compared with China 65%. So this means that massive investment must constantly go toward what? Infrastructure, energy systems, housing, transportation, employment generation. And for decades, India's political system was focused on nation building rather than power projection. And in fact, what happened is that this will actually take me into India's domestic politics as well. For 75 years, the political system that was there, it always talked about doing these things, building infrastructure, energy systems, this, that. But it was all just talk. Nobody actually wanted to do something until 2014 when India actually pushed. Now, I will give you the stats on this thing too. So think about it this way, that India's GDP reached $2.5 trillion dollars. Okay, $2.5 trillion dollars in 60 some years, 65 years. But India's GDP reached from those 2.5 to $4.5 trillion dollars from 2014 to 2026, in 12 years. That should tell you everything about when I say that too much domestic complexity and all that. Now, there's another thing too. See, India is not just some random country. Okay, India's has so many religions. Pretty much every religion that's out there on this planet exists in India. Okay, and it's not like they immigrated to India just few years ago or something and came here, went to India for job or something. Okay, they have been there since generations. Like, for example, Jewish people, they live in India. They live in a country, they live in a country that has the second largest Muslim population in the world. But nobody attacks any Jewish person or anybody. Persians live over there, Zoroastrians live over there. Now let me tell you even another interesting thing about this whole system, the way it works, is that 1971 war was fought between India and Pakistan, and it was led by India's army chief at that time, chief of army staff, Mr. Sam Manek Shah. And two people actually who were responsible for Pakistan's surrender, mainly who were the strategists and who actually executed all that. Besides other folks, I'm not taking credit from anybody else. I have respect for the Indian military and all that. two people, Sam Manekshaw, and second one was General Jacob, Lieutenant General Jacob, actually, in those days. You know what's interesting is Lieutenant General Jacob is actually Jewish, and he was Jewish, and Sam Manekshaw, he was Zoroastrian, Persian, Iranian. Imagine that. They both they both formed a strategy to take down Pakistan's 93,000 soldiers and liberate Bangladesh. So this complexity actually creates lots and lots of political challenges, and then there are lots and lots of, there used to be, at least nowadays it's not that much, but there used to be lots and lots of insurgencies too, like insurgencies in Northeast. And those insurgencies, those fault lines were actually promoted, or say, I would say, supported by foreign actors. Just recently, what happened? The what's his name? Eric Von Dyke or something. The dude, American dude, the spy from CIA. He got caught in India, delivering, along with six Ukrainians, delivering drones and everything else to Myanmar. The whole idea was that leave all that hardware in Myanmar, but then use that to support the insurgency in the northeast part of India. Now, when these type of things happen, then that creates a challenge for India too. And this is why lots of other countries try to use that internal challenges to their advantage. Okay. So this is why India has to be very cautious about punching its own weight. Why? Because you have to handle the situation in a very delicate fashion, internally and externally. And internally, the whole idea that Indian government or people have is that they may be insurgent, yes, but they are Indian first, though. They are basically uh, they are lost in a way. That's how at least the government sees them, and they try to talk to them. They try to negotiate with them, and eventually they make them surrender. And things happen, happen, and it has been successful. But nonetheless, it is a problem. Okay, so now, if you look into the second reason, let's go into the second reason. Okay, second reason is the manufacturing power. India's manufacturing power is still underdeveloped. Okay, so if you look into it, then geopolitical power anywhere, geopolitical power follows industrial capacity. Whether it is, I would say, I mean, if you look into it, like even India in old days, India, China, they contributed to the global economy in such a massive way. It was because of their manufacturing, what they manufactured in old days. Then came British. British, what they did, they stole things from India, but nonetheless, they improved their manufacturing. That's what they did, right? And that's how they improved their exports and all that. You can love them or hate them, but that's the reality of it. Then America became America. Why America became America? Because America focused on its manufacturing capacity. America built its manufacturing along with the military industrial complex. A military industrial complex was successfully established because America was able to build the manufacturing. There was a time when the entire Africa was dominated by America, but then slowly and slowly China took over. Now, if you look at the numbers here, right? China shares global manufacturing output that is like 28%. India's manufacturing share of GDP is 13 to 17%, barely moved since 1991. And this is about the goods, okay? I'm not talking about anything else, okay? And then Germany's output is 20%. And India's defense export is like $2 billion, right? So if you look at the exports wise also, if you look at the export number, you will find that China exports roughly around 3.4 trillion in goods annually. And India exports roughly 430 to 450 billion dollars in goods. And India's economic success, basically, it came through services, especially IT. IT exports exceeded what $200 billion annually, and total services exports exceeds $320 billion. Now think about it this way, that considering the services they integrate into the global system, meaning that it is sort of kind of a dependency. Okay, so if you have so much dependency, so that you can increase your exports, if your exports have lots of dependencies like this, as in services is there but your services depends on, say, some German company, then how are you going to provide them how are you going to do power projection with that country? Now let me go with this very simple example, like Qatar. India imported 45% of its natural gas from Qatar. Now if there is a problem domestically, considering India has a large Muslim population, then if Qatar opposes it or says something to basically in their favor, in that population's favor, then India has to be very careful about it. Why? Because even if a month of stopping the natural gas service can actually create inflation and hyperinflation and other problems. It can depreciate the India's currency as well. So so that's why when you don't have that kind of manufacturing, then you cannot really go and do power projection like that. Especially if you're manufacturing and exports, goods exports and all that is just 450 billion, 460 billion, and you also don't dominate in critical areas like China, for example. China dominates in critical rare earths. China actually never started off as a semiconductor country, a semiconductor chip manufacturer. China never started off like that. It was all TSMC, South Korea, Japan. They all did the work, but eventually Chinese learned that okay, this is the thing. And they started to put little bit of digital semiconductor, 25 nanometers semiconductor chips and all that into their toys and started to sell it to Americans. And then what happened? Then they surpassed Japan. They beat Japan at their own game. And then guess what? Chinese started to build 3 nanometer, 5 nanometer chip, 3 nanometer chip. Now Chinese are very close to building what? 2 nanometer chip through their own fabrication methods. And they control the rare earths, 90% of the rare earths. Extraction and processing. Why is that? Because they know that anybody can mine it, but extraction and processing is the real thing. That's where the bottleneck is. So India doesn't do that. Yes, India has exports and all that, but India does not really say dominate something in exports, even manufacturing or exports, that India can go and put some sort of sanction or say embargo or something on that product, that world is gonna suffer. So world should bow down to India and say, hey, please don't do that. Right? So, and that's where the problem is. That's another reason. That's why this is the reason that India needs to work on the manufacturing really heavy duty. Now in the manufacturing and the export, since we are talking about it, right? I'll tell you this, that the previous governments, okay, I'm gonna say this thing because it's very important, that previous governments before Prime Minister Modi, what they did is that they signed these free trade agreements with lots and lots of global South countries. Okay. Now here's the kicker. Okay, here's the interesting part. You have to understand this very carefully, how exports actually work. Okay. So they signed the exports, so the free trade agreements with these global South countries like ASEAN countries, then some in the Indian Ocean, like Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. Then they signed it with ASEAN countries, Indonesia, Malaysia, and all that. Right? They did all that, and that created an enormous trade deficit with India. That created enormous trade deficit for India. Why is that? It created trade deficit for India because India wasn't exporting them much. Instead, India was just importing things from them. That created the trade deficit, and that trade deficit led to the depreciation of the currency. So, for those who don't know, this is why Prime Minister Modi actually was on a free trade agreement signing spree with all these Western countries. Now, let me explain you the key point here, though, that how key point that uh, why free trade signing the free trade agreement with ASEAN and all these countries did not work in India's favor. It's very simple. It didn't work in India's favor because both countries make the same product. Indonesia also manufactures the same thing as India does. Look at Bangladesh. What does Bangladesh does? Bangladesh simply is into textile. India is also in textile. So pretty much global south countries, what they do is that whatever they produce, it's all the similar products. This is why, okay? This is another reason why BRICS countries have never signed free trade agreement with each other. This is the primary reason. Because if they sign the free trade agreement with each other, then what they're going to export to each other. And this is the one problem that Russians actually um, tell Indian counterparts in a very, very nice way. They say that, hey, biggest problem is that we don't know what to import from India, which means that they don't know anything special that India is offering that they should take. And that's the problem with pretty much every global south country. Okay, so this is why India went on this free trade agreement signing spree with who? European Union, United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, Chile, Brazil. Then bilateral trade agreement with United States, which is still not signed completely, all the talks and blah blah back and forth. But nonetheless, that's what was needed from the get-go. So when actually this current government found out the problem, they immediately acted on it and tried to fix it. So now you understand the picture, right? What exactly was going on with manufacturing, the free trade agreement and all that. All right, now let's get to the reason number 3. Reason number 3, the dependence on foreign defense systems. This is another thing. See, power projection you can do in few ways. One is that you use trade as a tool, currency weaponization, trade weaponization, and then you show the hard power. The hard power that India showed Pakistan last year. But even in this also there is a problem, that dependence on foreign defense systems. And simple rule is that you cannot project hard power on a foreign supply chain. And a great power that can't sustain its military independently is a well-armed client state. That's all it is. Okay, and that's true to a very large extent. Now let's look at the whole entire thing. Okay, let's look at the supply chain here, the defense supply chain. India's defense suppliers. Who are India's defense suppliers? In like 40% Russia. Sukhoi 30 MKI, MiG-29 S-400, just to name a few. Okay, 15% France, Rafale helicopters, this, that, right? 12% Israel, sensors, UAVs, precision munitions and all that. 10% is USA, C-17s, P-8Is, Apache and all that. 23% others, that is India's own domestic and all that mix. Tejas, BrahMos, DRDO systems, HAL and all that. Okay. But still, if you notice, then there's a major chunk that comes from outside. Then uh, other thing is that you have to have oil reserve to fight a long term war. Energy. Now, to fight a long term war, you have to have sustainable sources of energy. US has lots of oil reserve, lots of natural gas and all that. Russia has that too. That's why Russia can fight a long term war. China doesn't have that, but China still gets it all that through pipelines and all that. So China has worked it, and China has maintained a continuous supply of it. And then also China has also built its military power through the manufacturing, because China mastered the manufacturing and building. So if you look into the numbers wise, right? So numbers wise, I'll tell you this: the amount of time America takes to build one warship, a destroyer, let's just say destroyer, a corvette or something, okay? China builds 20 corvettes or destroyers in that time frame. That's how far ahead Chinese shipbuilding is compared to America. So when you talk about power projection, so just not saying that yes, yeah, we need to have our own defense. There's the defense exports and all that. We need to have our own products and this and that. It's good, but you have to build it if you want the power projection. But for India, it lacks from the energy security point of view, right? And this is, I'm just talking about the hard power right now, not hardware, sorry. Hard power right now. Hard power depends on what? Energy security, weapon security, munition security. You gotta manufacture the ammunitions and all. You gotta manufacture tanks. You gotta manufacture hardware enough and fast enough to be able to sustain a long-term war. You have to have that technology so that you can have a blue water navy. India has blue water navy, but can India really build aircraft carrier or ships and corvettes like China does? No, India doesn't do that, right? So that's a problem, because there are too many dependencies. So India cannot commit to operations that risk supplier relationships without risking combat readiness, cannot export arms freely to states suppliers disapprove of, cannot develop doctrine that deviates from assumptions embedded in imported platforms, right? Like for example, if somebody buys F-35 from United States, then United States puts the condition on them that, hey, you cannot use F-35 on America's allies. So if America sells its F-35 to 192 countries, then you just cannot go and use it on one country that is your enemy, but America's ally or something like that. That's the whole problem. So India's supply chain technically is also a leash. What that leash is? Leash is something that you put on a dog to control them wherever they go. So it's like a string. Anyways, so but there is a goodness to it. There's a bright side to it. Bright side is that defense export recently crossed 2.6 to 3 billion. Okay, and by 2030 it is going to reach, say, almost 30 to 40 billion dollars. So it's growing. Okay, now there are some other numbers I wanted to tell you, that India has one of the largest militaries on earth, 1.4 million active personnel, top 5 global defense spending, nuclear triad capability. So Stockholm International Peace Research Institute data, basically it shows that between 2019 and 2023, India was the largest arms importer in the world. Now, think about it this way, that all these countries, Russia can build its own fighter jets, US can do that, China can do that. But India has to look for engines, jet engines elsewhere. India can build its own too, but India doesn't have its own jet engine building capability yet. So these are the things. You cannot go and just do the power projection because of one of these things, right? Now let's come down to reason number 4. Reason number 4 is this: limited control over global trade architecture. What does that even mean? See, trade architecture simply means that um, does India control any global logistics system? No, India does not. See, global power basically sits inside logistics systems. About 80 to 90% of global trade moves by sea. So the systems controlling that trade include shipping fleets, ports, maritime insurance, financial settlement networks. India's share of global merchant fleet is only about 1 to 2%. That's about it. Now let's look at the trade architecture. Just think about it, okay? 3 powers, 3 approaches to trade as weapon. United States, Bretton Woods system, Swift, dollar reserve. We know all about it, okay? China, BRI. China did the same thing. China built BRI, China created e-yuan, and then China started to push its own currency also. Then China also has its own banking systems that go and provide loans and everything else to other countries. Right? Chinese finance infrastructure, Chinese contracts, yuan denominated debt is there, dispute resolution closures that favor Beijing. Dependency architecture is there, right? It's not aid. What India is doing FTAs and bilateral deals. They're signing CEPA with UAE, walked away from RCEP, that was Chinese. That's fine, excluding itself 30% of global G. That's fine. Trade as commerce, not as leverage platform. Then India is also signing few other things, right? With the United Kingdom, with European Union, the mother of all deals and all that. But is India able to promote its currency like Chinese does? Has India launched its own e-rupee yet? India is doing in certain areas, okay? India is doing in certain, it's not all doom and gloom. But work is being done on it. Okay, like UPI is there, and India is promoting its UPI in almost 30 some countries. But that work is being done, and it takes time to establish yourself to that level. China has at least 30-year head start against India. So this is another thing, that when you have this capability to change the trade architecture, maritime shipping control, and all that, then when you have all that, then you can do things. Look at the United States, for example, okay? Why do you think dollar has survived all these years? In spite of every country, every major power that's out there pretty much hates the United States dollars, the petrodollar system. They just hate it. But why they cannot kill it? Simply because it is embedded into the system. It is deeply embedded into the system. There are 11,000 entities that are linked to Swift payment system. 11,000 compared to China's system CIPS, only 1,500 give take. India has probably 500, 600, 700 give take. So compared to 11,000, 600, 700 or 1,500, look at you see the stark difference. Then dollar is there. I mean, shipping insurance, every shipping insurance, there are only two ways basically that shipping insurance nowadays provided. Dominant is the Lloyd of London. But Lloyd of London does everything in dollar, even though it's based in London, but it does in dollar. It doesn't say that, hey, let's do it in pound. Think about it. Now that's the power right there. Why not? Why not London or United Kingdom asks Lloyd of London to just provide all that into some other currency like pound or something? So that's the thing, right, guys? So you have to build something like that, a shipping infrastructure, a trade architecture. You have to develop all that in order to do some hardcore power projection. Okay, you have to be able to weaponize those things. When you have those things, you have something to weaponize. Otherwise, you cannot go and do hardcore power projection. Now, some of you will be like, okay, so how Russians are doing power projection? Russians are not doing power projections the way we actually are trying to say. Russians are simply going head on against another power of the same level, that is United States. And Russians are successfully scaring that power. So when the superpower, even the lone superpower, at least not now, but back in the day, when the lone superpower is scared of you, that makes you a great power in itself. Simply because you have that. Russia is one country that can survive on its own. Even you put all the sanctions and all that. Look at the landmass that they have. Does Russia need even shipping or anything? Russia doesn't need all that. They have everything through land. They have energy, they have the technology, they have all that. So when Russians go head on against Americans, like in Ukraine or anywhere else, then that scares them. Look at Chinese. Chinese have that leverage at this point. Leverage. What leverage is that? They have the rare earth leverage. They have manufacturing leverage. Right? So you have to build that trade architecture. Okay. So now let's move to the number 5. Okay. Now, what is that? Number 5 is post-colonial reflex, no ideological export product. What does that even mean? See, most major powers, what they do is they export ideology along with influence. Ideology as in what they believe in and what they sell. Like, for example, if you look into it, then the moment Middle East got some sort of leverage, like they started to get the dollar, right, through the oil. What they started to do in 1973, first they did is they imposed embargo on the Western countries. Okay. And then when 1975 G7 was created to counter these type of situations, West immediately acted on it. Okay. Now, when the Middle East actually got the money, what they did, they started to promote their Islam. They started to fund these madrasas, these mosques that are out there through their funding, through back channel fundings and all that. To what? To spread radicalization. And while they were spreading this type of stuff outside, elsewhere in other countries, they were de-radicalizing their own population. So the problem with India was that India does not do any of that. So India basically what did, India absorbed the colonial subjugation so deeply that not being an imposing power became a civilizational virtue. Why do you think British actually lasted in India that long? Think about it. They lasted in India that long because nobody really cared about opposing it. That's the honest truth. Yeah, lots of people may not like it, but that's the truth. That they just got used to it. So when you get used to something like that, then yeah, it's hard. right? So, what exactly happened here? So Nehru, basically, he was the first prime minister. So he didn't choose non-alignment, which is something he was big proponent of. He made restraint into a moral identity. I mean, he was the guy who wanted to kill its military. He was saying that police should be watching the borders, protecting the borders, not the military. We don't need military. Those were his words to General Thamaiya. So the premise is that India would be great by being different from powers that had exploited it. 75 years later, that premise has calcified into institutional reflex. At least for 75 years, the same party was in the power. So that's what they did. They never funded their military. Their ideology was something, we don't even know what their ideology was. Some call them traitors, some call them something. But it led to one thing, that India couldn't project its power elsewhere. Okay. And then there is an elite bureaucratic class, IFS, PMO advisors, strategic community. They were all trained in this doctrine. Okay. They were trained in this doctrine to say that, yeah, let's calm down. Let's think about it strategically. Why? Because their interests were aligned with some foreign country. Okay. So that's why they always avoided this type of confrontation. They avoided any kind of direct conflict like that. So restraint is basically treated as maturity or some sort of, say, sophistication and all that. So if you look into it, it's an ideological export product. USA, liberal democracy, that's the BS they export. Liberal democracy. But where there is war, first gang that reaches to the particular country into the war zone is the conversion factory. All the Christians, the missionaries and all, they reach there immediately. Then China sells what? China sells manufacturing. China sells BRI. China sells prosperity without liberalization. Russia sells civilizational multipolarity. Russia says that, hey, we are the saviors of the poor and downtrodden. The countries that nobody is going to support, we are going to help you. That's why if you go look into it, they always support the underdog. That's why they always enter into the war in African countries. In fact, they have successfully kicked out France from lots of these countries too. It all happened because of Russian support. What about India? Hinduism is not an export religion. Okay. Ahimsa is anti-coercive. That's what was preached. Like, okay, yeah, we should follow non-violence and this and that. That was Gandhi's philosophy. But democracy is actually, if you look into it, democracy is Western branded in the global South. Because that's how West branded it. Because that's how West wanted it. Because that's what they understand. If you want to do trade and all that with the West, then West needs to have something to understand, a system that West can understand. That's why when they talk about reforms, have you ever wondered what are those reforms are? Those reforms are basically that they're saying that, hey, the laws that we have in our country, just create the same laws in your country for that trade. So that we understand how that works. So that we can manipulate your system accordingly to our advantage. So when you have that type of setup, you cannot do the power projection. Now, yes, but again, it's not all doom and gloom. See, why it's not all doom and gloom? You have to understand this. It's not all doom and gloom because it is the same diaspora that goes into other countries, especially when it's all about radicalization, violence all over. Then people are not actually afraid of Indian people. They are very friendly. That's the image. That's the social construct that is set up, right? So that is helpful in a way, but as a country, if you want to do the power projection, then you cannot be soft and then do a hard power projection. People, your enemies should take you seriously when you say something, right? So there is that. And another thing, like real quick, okay, the constraint was never the Indian public. Operation Sindhu proved that India's democracy supports coercive action when the government has the will to move, right? So the public health opposition couldn't land a punch. The international friction was absorbed. Bottleneck is elite institutional culture, not democratic permission. Okay. So let's go to the reason number 6. Now, this is a very important reason. Energy dependence, and I talked briefly about it earlier, right? Energy dependence limits strategic freedom. Right? Why? Because, see, strategic freedom or strategic autonomy requires energy freedom, and those two variables move together. Hmm? Now, you cannot sanction a country your refineries depend on. So, energy dependence, in a way, is energy dependence is a veto on foreign policy options. For those who don't remember, at least for people from my folks from India, actually, what happened in Nupur Sharma's case? Qatar, Iran, Saudi Arabia, they all made their statement without even looking into the actual thing, something that I talked about earlier, right? The projection. So the Indian public was like, hey, why Qatar is just this small country? How can they say this and that? I'm not getting into the nuances of it, what exactly happened and all. That's what happened in the past is past. But question is that why India didn't respond in a with a hard power, or in India did not just simply say shut the fuck up, mind your business or something like that, because of India's energy dependence on these countries. That's why. Because one little embargo just for a month can actually push back your economy, probably a couple of years, push back your GDP somewhere else, and not to mention your currency will depreciate on top of it. Why? Because you will have to import something else from somewhere else. Now you can see what's happening right now in Iran war, right? Countries are now scrambling all over to really figure out the new supply chain for their energy needs to meet that energy demand. And that's what a real projection looks like, the power projection. Look at Iran, what you think? If you look number by number, Iran doesn't stand a chance against America or anybody. I mean, here we are talking about America and Israel trying to hammer Iran. But the reality is that yes, in spite of all that blabbering by President Trump and others, reality is that there is nothing has been damaged in Iran. Yeah, just to show off, to make noise, they have destroyed these oil wells or gas pipelines or here and there, so that there is large fire and all that, right? Because you want something concrete for the world to see that, hey, we are doing some damage, right? Something tangible you want to show the world that, hey, look, we did the damage. Yay. That creates a propaganda, that creates a noise that Iran is losing. But what is the reality here? Reality is that they don't even have the balls to go and open the Strait of Hormuz. Just today, actually, another ship was blown away into pieces in the Strait of Hormuz. Actually, that's called power projection. Iranians said that from the get-go, and I'm not supporting anybody once again. If I supported all this, I would be making lots and lots of war videos too, like lots of people do it on YouTube. Okay. But no, the reality is that Iranians said that don't mess with us. Whether we have the power protection or not, whether we have weapons or not, but we are sitting on the minefield. Natural gas and oil is the minefield. Those things are highly explosive. And then there is Strait of Hormuz. We will do some serious damage, but nobody listened, right? So that's your energy dependence. Okay. So now if you look into all that, what do you see? India imports approximately 85% of its crude oil. Energy remains one of India's largest structural constraints. And oil, basically, the natural gas import, oil import is more than half of its natural gas import. Then, if you look into more numbers, $40 billion is the Gulf remittance annually. 8 to 9 million Indian workers are there. Right? Three constrained relationships: Gulf states, Russia, Central Asia. Who should India side with? India has 12% of defense imports from Israel. Okay, then India actually has 85% of crude oil imports, and then out of that 45% of the natural gas comes from Qatar and all that. So what should India do? Whose side should India take? 40% of the defense imports are Russians. When Europeans said during the Russia-Ukraine war, they were asking India to take the Europe side. Indians said that, hey, wait a minute, nobody's taking sides. We are on our own side. But why is that? These are some of the reasons that I just told you about. These are the reasons that India didn't take any side or anything. Okay, so you have to have all this energy dependence. Another thing is the Camco, the Canadian uranium. India just signed a $2 billion uranium deal with Canada so that India can start importing uranium from Canada for its nuclear reactor surge, the massive nuclear reactor building spree. So this is why, okay? So if you look into the arithmetic trap, right? India has bilateral leverage over the Gulf. Gulf states depend on Indian labor and services and food and water as well. India supplies them food and water. But India cannot convert that into regional coercive leverage because doing so risks the energy flows. It depends on to keep its economy running. And the dependency runs the both ways. But India normally blinks first. Okay, so that's the thing. Now let's get into the reason number 7, and this is the sharpest indictment: India's global diaspora, influence without control. 32 million people of Indian origin live globally, all over the world. Okay, and this is like the largest and the most economically accomplished diaspora in the world. If you look into CEO of Google is Indian, CEO of Microsoft is Indian, CEO of Pepsi is Indian, CEO of just name it. I can go on and on and on. This is a very long list. Look at Ajit Banga. He's the World Bank president. So there you have it, right? But the most powerful non-weaponized asset any great power has ever failed to systemize. India has never used its people, the powerful people outside, to its advantage, to weaponize them. Why is that? Why? Because India has a service architecture, that service dependency. Okay, services. If India starts to weaponize it, then it's gonna impact the services. Now let's look at the numbers. I told you about 32 million, right? Then 125 billion is remittances in 2023. The single largest remittance flow globally. Systemic diaspora lobbying architectures built by India comparable to APAC. Zero. They don't even use that for lobbying. And now look at Israelis. What do Israelis do? Israeli lobbying is so strong in the United States that US just jumps into war with any country for Israel. That's how powerful that diaspora is. Now look at China. Chinese diaspora in US, any Chinese, pretty much any Chinese, I would say, for the most part, any Chinese who goes to China, chances are that they are potential spy, potentially they are working for PLA or the Chinese government. How do you think that China got all these stealth technologies and this and that? Because all these professors and all, they work in those universities, and then they get the defense funding and all that, and then they share that information to China somehow. All right, but it doesn't happen here in India. They don't do that. Then now let's look at a few other things here. Okay. And India has never basically replicated this model. India's reality is OCI card, Overseas Citizens of India. It's an identity document, not strategic instrument. Sunak proved it. Indian heritage, British interests, right? Clear cut. Then look at JD Vance. His wife is actually of Indian origin, but what happened? He was calling India to stop the war with Pakistan, stop thrashing Pakistan. Right? The diaspora remits the money. India has never converted that into organized foreign policy leverage. The other reason behind it is that lots and lots of these bureaucrats in the Indian foreign services, they live, and their kids and all, they go to school and all that in these foreign countries. So their interests are also aligned more towards their kids rather than towards the country for which they are actually hired. So they start to think in different direction, and loyalty, you can say, in a way gets compromised, and the vision for the country actually becomes blurry. Okay, and that's the seventh reason, guys. So what exactly happened? In a nutshell, what I can say is that India is not punching below its weight because it lacks the fists. It punches below its weight because it hasn't decided to throw it yet. Okay, you have to build that leverage. You have to build that leverage. You have to build leverage in hard power. You have to build leverage in trade. You have to build leverage in finance. You have to build leverage in manufacturing. You have to build leverage in supply chains. And India has started to think in those directions now. Up until now, what India was doing was, it was all one step behind. You have to make a backup plan. You have to figure out a way to somehow counter it. That's why India always looks into options, multiple options. Why? Because so that nobody can actually use that leverage against India. That's why India always supported multiple options, because they know their weakness. Okay, they know their weakness. That's why it was always about multiple options. Now they are working towards building the trade corridors. They're working towards building their own payment systems. They're going towards e-rupee and all that model, right? So all that has started now, but for it to get to that point where India can do the real power projection, that will take some time. But India is still a great power nonetheless. Why? Because India has built some great friendships, and that matters. So this is it for this video, guys. I hope you learned something, you enjoyed it. Please do like and subscribe, and I will talk to you guys in another video. Take care.